Welcome to the Transition Bridge podcast. This is Debi Ronka, and today I want to have a conversation about the cycle of criticism. Here's a great quote that I love from Frank Clark. Criticism, like rain, should be gentle enough to nourish a man's growth without destroying his roots. Criticism can be helpful or hurtful, and it all comes down to what is behind the criticism when it's given, and also the vessel or the person that is the author of it. We have either been the recipient of criticism, which can be very painful, or we are the ones who are actually giving the criticism, which also is a painful process. June Hunt has this quote that I think opens up June Hunt has this quote that I think really gives a great perspective on criticism. There are two signs to the, oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to start again here. June Hunt has a great quote that I think is an eye-opening perspective on criticism. There are two sides to the coin of criticism. When you give destructive criticism, the other person is hurt. When you give constructive criticism, the other person is helped. So, for instance, in the world of art, criticism is good for creativity. In the marketplace, in your place of employment, projects need a critical eye to ultimately make it better. Or if you're writing a book, your editor may critique some areas to create a better flow or a deeper thought. These are all helpful criticisms. Abraham Lincoln says, "He has a right to criticize who has a heart to help." This type of criticism is really helpful as long as it's done and spoken with a caring, thoughtful heart that is mindful of the tones and the words that are being used to get their point across. This in itself, honestly, is an art or an emotional skill for all of us to learn. So we're able to do this in a productive way and not wound or crush the hopes or even the spirit of the person receiving the criticism. I read this story the other day about a doctor who was being criticized because she was spending more time with her patients than on research. This initially devastated the doctor, but once she came to the conclusion that this was the other person's opinion, she was able to reject that criticism because she came to understand that it did not really align or match with what her core beliefs or her personal values were for her own work. And so this released her from living and walking under that critical thought of her colleague. So I thought that was great insight. When we do receive criticism, really evaluate what it is that we're hearing. And does it really line up with who we are? And maybe it's just that other person's opinion, and we can just negate that critical thought. So let's talk about the type of criticisms that can be harmful. I always teach that there is a root and a reason behind the ways we act, feel, or behave. So, for instance, if you grew up with a critical parent, or you lived in a home where criticism just seemed to be the language of the home, without realizing it, we will adopt that behavior. And we're going to also become the critic of our spouse and our children. We're modeling what we grew up with, and we may not see that this is not healthy. It's a pattern that we have learned, and we don't see the pain that's really being inflicted on our relationships. I had a relationship like this in my life where the person critiqued me whenever they came to my home, and no matter what I did, she could find fault and very quick to verbalize it. And in all honesty, I never really enjoyed these visits because they always left me feeling angry and defeated. It didn't matter how hard I worked. It didn't matter how creative I was. It was just never enough. I began to realize later on, after many years, that I was never going to be able to satisfy a person who has a critical spirit. I also learned that because of this person's own insecurities and hurts in her own life, that criticism became her way of feeling better about herself, feeling like she was in control. And by putting me down, just made her feel better. One of the pieces of advice that you'll hear when you go to counseling for a situation like this is to try to see the person behind the criticism and the brokenness from where they're coming from. I know this is difficult, especially when you've been wounded, but will help you come out of that. And that's what I did. And it wound up giving me a different perspective because then I realized it wasn't me. That wasn't who I was. And it wasn't that what I was doing was wrong. I was okay. But it was her inability to rise above her own emotional pain that allowed the criticism to have a voice. I also learned that I needed to have a conversation and bring this out on the table, let them know how this was really making me feel. And then I set a strong boundary where I would no longer allow the negative comments to have a platform. Of course, this was a healthy, productive conversation. It wasn't a blame game. It was an awareness of how it was making me feel and to hopefully help the other person become aware of their style and what it was that they were doing. Honestly, what's interesting, a lot of time the critical person is not even aware that they're being critical. And this is how this person felt. She had a huge blind spot, but eventually took ownership of her behavior. And through our conversation and the boundaries that I erected, our relationship actually got better. Another thought is that sometimes when we have resentments towards others, we become eager to the point of just pointing out the flaws of others. You see, our own bitterness can cause us to become a critical person who sees others as inferior, and we assume that role of fault finding with a derogatory view of others. That's kind of painful, isn't it? It's hard to hear these things, but I'm examining my own heart and listening to my own words to see if there's any type of criticism within myself. And that's always good to do self-awareness checks on different topics, different attitudes that we could have within our heart to see what needs to be changed, fixed, or healed. In fact, here's another way to look at criticism. We can become our own worst critics, and that's when our own inner critic comes alive. You see, our inner critic never wants to tell us the great things about us or what we've accomplished. It only wants to convince us that we can't, that we are unable, that we don't have value, or maybe your time is just over. These are just some of the lies that can come from our inner critic. And so, just like dealing with the person who criticizes us, we need to stop listening to ourselves. We need to change our self talk. We need to change the narrative of what we say to ourselves. We need to change our conversation to one of empowerment and encouragement of who we really are and what we are created to do. And the best thing we could ever do is to find time for ourselves to be with a friend or a coach that can give us a different perspective. If you find yourself that you're overly critical, this is a good, healthy step for you to take because you really need to have someone give you feedback so you can break the power of the lie that you are believing about yourself and have some healthy truth spoken to you so you can learn to change the way or the pattern of thinking that's holding you back. So here are some questions I want all of us to ask ourselves to even become aware of our potential or possibility of walking in a critical spirit. So, am I overly critical? Do I find fault with what people or my loved ones are doing? Do I make people feel that they are not good enough? Do I generally have a critical attitude towards people? Am I generally focused on the faults of others? Do I elevate myself by putting others down? Do I overly criticize my children about school, sports, or other activities? Children who grow up with a controlling, critical parent will become either a controlling, critical adult or they're going to find themselves emotionally shutting down. They may also adopt a critical spirit themselves in order to maintain a sense of power and control their lives later in life. This is a good wake up call for all of us as parents or even grandparents to watch our words and any critical attitude that we could be presenting. The goal is to have a caring heart over a critical heart and to bring life and lift up rather than tear down. And I think that's why I wanted to talk about criticism today. It steals from our relationships and it can be deadly to the hearts of our loved ones. And once we can recognize that maybe we are being critical, we can now find a place of ownership and healing and begin to not only heal our relationships, but heal our own hearts as well. Understanding why we are critical is the beginning. It's not our fault. It's something we've learned to protect or defend ourselves, and it can be changed. The cycle can be broken. I would love to help. So if you are either the one who has been critical, or if you are the one who has been affected by the criticism, please reach out to me. And I want to just offer a free call. Let's have a conversation together. I want to help you find that place of breakthrough, healing, and a new beginning. So just look for the link in my show notes and just schedule a call with me. This could be the turnaround in your life, whether you are the critic or you are the one that's been affected by criticism. I think we've all played roles, both roles in our lives. So reach out, and I want to thank you all again as my transition tribe, as you come in each and every week to learn, to embrace, and to be transformed by the purpose and the power of the transitions in our lives.